WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisEye to 44321.
Christy Welch of Pere is the Democratic candidate for the 88th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Christy Welch, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what is your campaign's key message? Why are you running for this office?
Yeah, so I've been knocking a lot of doors since signature collection started in April. So talked to lots and lots of voters, and there's definitely some recurring themes. A major issue that I hear about is in regards to costs, rising costs, and there's a few buckets there. The main buckets, so healthcare, childcare, groceries, and
Housing?
Housing, yes. And, for a lot of folks, they're really stretched thin, especially when you think about people who maybe are renting and have childcare needs. They're in a really tough spot. So costs for sure, and then concerns about our public education system and the state of reproductive rights. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, a lot of people have concerns that is an erosion on women's rights, and I agree.
So if you're elected, what's an example of a bill that would be a priority for you to introduce?
Yeah, so, there's a lot of opportunities, and, I'd love to work on any of those topics that we just discussed. As a freshman assembly person, I'd ask to be deployed where I could be best used, but, I would love to work on incentivizing affordable housing, child care counts, maybe beefing that up a bit, adding in some early childhood education, reinstating reproductive rights. There's so many opportunities.
Many priorities.
Yes, indeed.
So if you're elected, you'll be entering the legislature during a biennial budget year. The state's projected to have more than a $4 billion surplus. What would be your top two priorities for use of that surplus funding?
Yeah, when we talk about the surplus, I think it's also important to note that we have $1.9 billion in the rainy day fund. So we've got a lot of funds in Wisconsin, and I think a balance between some targeted tax cuts for folks who are struggling the most, and putting some funding into some really important programs like the ones that we've just been talking about. So incentivizing affordable housing, child care, and
when you said reproductive rights, but those are two
yes.
for spending. When you talk about tax cuts or tax reform, who are the people that you are talking about that you would like to focus on?
So, folks in the middle class that are struggling to make ends meet, that all these cost pressures are impacting the most. I would not look to give much, if anything, to the very high earners. We need to target it to people that are in need of it in this economy.
You mentioned a little bit about education, K-12 education, clearly also a leading issue for many voters. What is your campaign's top priority for K-12 education?
Yeah, that's a very important issue to me. So for the past 13 years, the legislature has been under Republican control. And during that time, the amount the state gives to each district per student has barely changed, where previously it would, at least somewhat track with inflation. And so with that underfunding, we're now at a per pupil gap of over $3,300. So I would like to see us fully fund public education for sure. You know, our public schools are so important to our communities, and you know, it just makes sense to invest in our kids and give them a world-class education. And you know, for whatever they choose to do when they graduate, whether that's going on to higher education or entering the workforce. So we need more funds there.
Well, speaking of higher education, the state system of 4- and 2-year colleges and technical colleges, what do you see as the future of that system, and where should the legislature focus?
Yeah, so our UW system is one of the largest employers in the state and is a huge economic driver. It could be a even bigger economic driver. You know, along with our K-12 system, the 4-year and 2-year programs have seen lots of cuts in funding. And, you know, the UW system about 13 years ago was looked up to as a model that other states aspired to. And today, when you look at the amount of funding that we're putting into our 4-year institutions, Wisconsin ranks near the bottom. So there are definitely some opportunities there to make sure that we're investing in higher education. You know, our employers depend on the UW system to train their employees, and you know, our citizens. It just makes sense to, you know, we want people to stay in Wisconsin, to raise their family here, and if there's a good education system, it's much more likely that that's going to happen.
So you support that full funding of the University of Wisconsin system?
Yes.
Investments in I have to ask you about some workforce questions. What do you see as the state's largest workforce development challenge, and how would you propose to address it?
Yeah, so I've got some personal experience with this one. I was head of HR for a manufacturing company in Green Bay, and our company, along with so many others in the area, we really struggled with hiring employees to fill our open positions. And there's you know, low unemployment is great, but I think in the greater Green Bay area, we have negative unemployment. We have more positions that are open than people to fill them. And obviously that creates a huge strain on companies that are looking to grow. So, you know, I think there's some things that the state can do to alleviate that. You know, if we make our communities a place where people want to live and raise a family by, you know, doing things like ensuring affordable housing, affordable childcare, and good schools, then, you know, people want to stay in state, and other people, if they're maybe looking to relocate, they view Wisconsin as, you know, a top choice.
Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy. This also provides an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce, but currently there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
You know, I certainly think there should be a preference for hiring local when we've got those local and state projects happening. I wouldn't go so far as to make it a requirement. You know, you'd hate to have an unintended consequence of not being able to start or complete a project just due to local workforce conditions. But absolutely, it makes all the sense in the world when we're doing those projects to hire local. And then, you know, there's the added benefit for those communities. They have the project happening, and then their workers are getting paid good wages, and then they're going to be spending those earnings in the community. So that's a great twofer for them.
Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this issue, and what do you think should be done about it?
Yes, I'm definitely aware of this issue. You know, I will say in some cases it's perfectly fine and appropriate for an employee to be a 1099 employee, but if a company is purposefully, you know, trying to skirt rules in order to save costs on their part, that's not okay. You know, the workers lose out, you know, with protections like workers' comp, and the state loses out on payroll taxes. So we should definitely be discouraging that and making sure that that's minimized.
Affordable rental housing is an issue in Wisconsin. You've already discussed this as a priority for you. Some support government-imposed rent control to maintain affordability, while others argue keeping rent artificially low will decrease rental supply, resulting in increased prices. Tell us more about your sense of housing as an issue in which you think better addresses rental housing affordability. Is rent control part of the solution? You already talked about building more. Are there other solutions?
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, this is an issue that needs attention right away. I think we should focus on increasing supply before we start talking about rent control. We can certainly revisit that later, but sometimes there are negative outcomes when you impose rent control. Another area we could look at is capping the percent of homes and apartment buildings that can be owned by private equity, because if folks aren't living in the community, then they don't have a vested interest in making sure that homes stay affordable. So that's something that we could look at as well.
Transitioning to healthcare, medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, access to affordable health care is something that we need to make sure that all Wisconsinites are able to receive. This is a complicated issue that I think we need lots of subject matter experts to weigh in on. But, it's my understanding that a big part of the issue is that certain hospitals, depending on where they're located, rural hospitals, and if they're maybe located in a more low-income area, they get a disproportionate amount of patients that are coming in and, with Badger Care or Medicare, and those insurance types reimburse at a much lower rate than private insurance. So there are some systems that are bearing a disproportionate weight of that problem.
You support increasing the Medicaid reimbursement rate for hospitals?
Yes, for sure. And closures it's such a terrible thing to happen to the folks in western Wisconsin.
What about mental health care? Also a growing concern for Wisconsinites and for state and county budgets. What are you hearing on this issue, and what are some solutions?
Yeah, this has definitely come up a lot as well. It's so good to see that this is something that we're talking about more. I know in my generation it wasn't really something that had a name the way that we talk about it today. But there are a few key areas that I think with better mental health access could really be improved, and that would be our schools, our policing departments, and our prisons. And, I know from personal experience, and a lot of other folks have seen this as well, that if you are looking for a mental health care provider, sometimes the wait lists are months long. So, that just shows that there is a demand that's not being met. And, this is an area where we can help so many Wisconsinites by addressing this.
How specifically should Wisconsin move forward on the issue of abortion?
Yeah, so this is an important one to me. I stepped into the political world when Roe v. Wade was overturned. If a woman finds herself in a position where she's contemplating an abortion, she's at one of the lowest points of her life. No one makes that decision flippantly, and it's too complicated of an issue to legislate on. So I firmly believe that decision should be left up to a woman and her doctor.
So no number of weeks as a limit. What are the pressing transportation needs in your district, and how important is it that these needs are addressed, and for the state to keep on schedule with the reconstruction of our aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce?
Yeah, so in the 88th district, we've got a pretty well-maintained highway system, so that's good. Obviously we need to keep up with that. So, the focus in my district would be our roads and bridges. There are definitely parts of town that you drive through and you can see that they are in need of repair. And for folks that are driving over those roads every day, creates extra wear and tear on their vehicles, and that's passing on another cost to folks. So and investing in roads and bridges and making sure that the shared revenue that comes from the state allows municipalities to keep up with maintaining them.
What about PFAS and other water contaminants? They're a concern for a growing number of Wisconsinites. Do you see this as an important issue, and how would you propose to address it?
Definitely. So I have a degree in environmental economics, so I've always been concerned about the environment. But you definitely don't need a degree to know that every Wisconsinite needs access to safe, clean drinking water. That is something that it's required for life, right? And we, unfortunately, we have a situation where there have been funds that have been cleared to be released to help with remediation of PFAS, and it's being held up by the Joint Finance Committee, and really for no good reason that I can tell, so we need to prioritize releasing those funds so that people can, there's communities where people are relying on bottled water, and that's just not right.
We're down to our final two questions. How would you describe the leading differences between you and your opponent?
Yeah, I think the difference between my opponent and I is pretty clear. We're obviously in different parties, but I truly believe that the Democratic Party is on the side of the average Wisconsinite, average working families. All of the policies and proposals that you hear are coming from the Democrats in regards to how to make life a little easier for them by addressing those rising costs that we're talking about. And restoring reproductive rights. And I've always been transparent about my values and the policies that I'm putting forth, and I'll continue that in Madison. With a open door policy and keeping voters apprised of everything we're working on.
Final question. Let's say you're elected this fall and you get this magic wand you can use in the state capitol to resolve one issue in a way that brings all parties and people together. What is the issue?
Ooh, I would use my magic wand for campaign finance reform. There is so much money that's spent in politics, including by outside groups, and it creates an environment where, there's, as everyone is experiencing, all these negative attack ads and commercials and just piles and piles of mail. And, if we can level the playing field and every candidate gets the same amount of money and has to approach voters in, just focusing on their policies and their values, I think voters would appreciate that. I, as a candidate, would appreciate that. And additionally, I think it would create an environment where more people would be willing to step up to run because, with the way it currently works, people just, they really hesitate.
Well, thank you, Christy Welch of Pere, the Democratic candidate for the 88th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Christy Welch, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.